Private members' business, notice number 9, relating to the Baha'i faith, in the name of the member for Moncrieff.
And I call the member for Moncrieff. I move the motion relating to the Baha'i faith in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper. It gives me great pleasure to rise in the chamber today after meeting out on Parliament lawn with Iranian Australians and many from the Baha'i faith to speak about what's going on in Iran, but also to defend the right of those of the Baha'i faith, the right to practice their religion without being persecuted. And earlier this year in my office I met with Sepir Abedian and Huta Sabet, two members of the Gold Coast Baha'i community, and we spoke about their concerns regarding the treatment of their friends and their family in Iran. And Baha'is are the largest non-Muslim religious minority in Iran for decades, and they have been routinely persecuted, arrested, detained and imprisoned. And more recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, international media has reported that homes were raided, confiscated or bulldozed, and members of the Baha'i community were arrested in various cities throughout Iran because of their faith. None of this is new. The Baha'i faith community in Iran has been dealing with mistreatment and persecution for decades. Since 2005, more than 800 Iranian Baha'is have been arrested or detained due to their faith. And there have been more than 780 incidents of economic persecution documented. I heard one just the other night of a Gold Coaster whose family had escaped on camelback. And he won an award, an export award at the Australian Export Awards the other night in the Great Hall. Very, very proud of his achievements in this country. Baha'is are barred from holding government jobs, their businesses are routinely closed or discriminated against, and young Baha'is are prevented from attending university because of their faith. Where they can, Baha'i elders hold underground universities where they can learn and receive an education. The elders must be careful, as those caught educating young Baha'is can be and have been sentenced to 5-year jail terms. And this is the 21st century, and we're witnessing young people refuse the opportunity to further their knowledge because of their religion. Many Baha'is have left Iran, as I mentioned before, to seek a better life elsewhere, including in my community on the Gold Coast. And I want to share a story that Seppi, as we call him, with great warmth, shared with me during our meeting about a young Baha'i who came to Australia recently. After arriving in Australia, Sepp took this young person on a tour of a nearby university campus where there was an option to study. And as part of the tour, they visited the campus library. And this new Baha'i to our country was so nervous about entering the library, she asked Sepp if he was sure she was allowed to go inside. Could you imagine feeling like that? Unsure whether you're welcome in a place where so many of us feel safe, such as a public library or a university library. It's heartbreaking to hear the story and to know that young people are banned from places of learning, banned from having educational opportunities is heartbreaking. And Baha'is in Iran are subject to systemic violence and harassment, with hundreds of incidents reported of torture, physical assault, disappearances, suspicious deaths, arson against homes and businesses, vandalism, cemetery desecration, and the abuse of school children, which is fuelled by a continuous campaign to incite hatred against Baha'is in Iran. Iran's human rights record has been a long-standing and serious concern for Australia. And during our time in government, the Coalition repeatedly raised our concerns with Iran in Canberra, Tehran, and in multilateral forums. Australia is a co-sponsor of the annual UN General Assembly resolution on the human rights situation in Iran. We also co-sponsor the Human Rights Council resolution extending the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. In December last year, there was a UN General Assembly calling for an end to the harassment and discrimination against the Baha'i faith. We are troubled by the high number of death sentences and continued executions in Iran, and the treatment of ethnic and religious minorities, women and girls, and the LGBTIQA community. I want to thank the Baha'i faith community on the Gold Coast for the incredible job that they do in raising awareness and campaigning against the treatment of Baha'is in Iran. They've done such a great job, and I also want to say thank you to Kimberly Diamond, who represents the Baha'i faith on my Gold Coast youth Gold Coast Community Cabinet. I thank her for her voice for the Baha'i, for the future of the Baha'i faith on the Gold Coast.
Thank you. Time's expired. And I give the motion is to be seconded by the member for Moore, seconding the motion. Thank you very much. So the question...
Yes, I reserve my right to later.
Excellent. Well, the question is that the motion be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Tangney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to take this opportunity to speak to a grave matter. I speak in this parliament as a Buddhist and as a person from a different country. I would like to acknowledge that in Australia, I have the freedom to express my views. In Australia, we have the gifts and protections that democracy allows. These protections are not afforded to all around the world. Right now, horrific abuse is taking place in Iran. This is bloodshed, violence, death, and fear. This is marked by the brutal killing of Gina Mansa Amini, a 22-year-old woman, at the hand of so-called morality police in Iran. The morality police say Gina was not wearing her hijab too loosely, her hijab too loosely. This is unconscionable. Gina's death is unconscionable. This has led to protests in Iran. People have taken to the streets. Women in particular have taken to the streets. These women are risking their life to have their voice heard. These women are demonstrating with their actions that they would sooner face the risk of death than continue to face oppression. And people have faced death. Hundreds have lost their lives in the protests. For those who have been arrested, Iran Parliament recently voted in favor of death penalty for all current protest prisoners. Shockingly, the violence continues to grow, with members of the Baha'i faith subjected to appalling prosecution. This violence is tragically nothing new. The Baha'i have been facing prosecution from the Iranian government for 40 long years. This has been intensified repression and discrimination of the Baha'i in Iran. This is deeply concerning. My heart breaks for and with the Baha'i people. Amnesty International 2021-2022 report, The States of the World Human Rights, highlights the prosecution inflicted on members of Baha'i faith by the Iranian government, including restricted participation in education, employment, and political office. It includes torture and arbitrary detention and other cruel, violent means. Enforced disappearances are not uncommon. And it is forcible closures of business or confiscation of property. Houses are demolished, cemeteries are destroyed, and hate speech comes from the officials and state media. Authorities have prevented Baha'is from burying their loved ones in empty plots of cemeteries, instead inciting them to use mass gravesites. The Baha'i are not violent people. Importantly, the Baha'i faith calls for obedience to civil authority and rejects any act of violence or aggression. The Baha'i are kind people. They are a just people. They believe in equality of women and men. They believe in harmony of religion and science. They believe in an elimination of all form of prejudice and the equal standard of human rights for all people. I'm fortunate to have made connection with members of Baha'i faith during my time as a police officer. This warm relationship continues. I'm very grateful for the friendship of Baha'i community of Melbourne, including Dr. Jimmy Xiao and his peers. Their tireless works inspire me. The Albanese government condemns the human rights abuse perpetrated by Iran. Australia called on Iran to respect human rights and cease discrimination against religious and ethnic minority. We have raised our concerns with Iranian officials across multilateral fora, including at the UN. I stand in solidarity with those prosecuted in Iran. I stand with them in their aspiration for freedom, self-governance, and democracy. I stand with them in their campaign for peace. Zandibar Azadi. Long life freedom. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thanks, the member for Tangney. Just before I give the member for Moore the call, I just want to acknowledge there is a very strong Baha'i faith community in my own electorate of Newcastle, but I know that today we're represented in the chamber with people from the Baha'i communities of Canberra, Brisbane and Sydney, so you're very welcome. I give the call to the member for Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the Baha'i community in Australia, I second this private member's motion calling for an end to the systematic persecution of Baha'is in Iran. The Baha'i faith is considered as the second largest religion in Iran after Islam. According to the United Nations, there are an estimated 350,000 adherents of the Baha'i faith in Iran and an estimated 5 million followers worldwide. The freedom to practice one's chosen religion is a fundamental right that forms the core of our democratic beliefs in Australia. Our society allows freedom of religion, free from persecution, intimidation and harassment. It is our sincere hope that the international religious tolerance movement will spread like a light throughout the world. It is incumbent upon us as elected representatives in a free society to call upon foreign governments around the world, including countries such as Iran, to respect the freedom of religion and allow their citizens to worship peaceably with tolerance. In raising public awareness of this issue, it is hoped that world attention will be focused on addressing this grave injustice. Baha'is have remained peaceful and active members of Iranian society. They pose no threat to the government. They are not aligned with any political ideology or opposition movement, nor do they engage in subversive activity or violence. Currently in Iran, Baha'is are barred from holding government jobs, and their shops and other enterprises are routinely closed by officials at all levels. The youth in the Baha'i community are also persecuted, prevented from attending university, and as volunteer educators have been arrested and imprisoned. In 2022 alone, there have been over 30 arrests on account of their faith in various cities throughout Iran. In August this year, authorities bulldozed 6 Baha'i houses and confiscated more than 20 hectares of land in the Mazandaran province in northern Iran. Earlier this month, Iran stepped up its actions against the Baha'i community, arresting 12 citizens, and this has been condemned by global rights groups. In supporting this motion for an end to the systematic persecution of Baha'is by the government of Iran, and more broadly an end to persecution of Baha'is by governments across the world, I urge all governments to consider the potential contributions that can be made to society by allowing Baha'is to freely practice their religion, free from persecution, intimidation, and harassment. International monitoring constitutes a vital safeguard for the protection of the Baha'i community. Whenever this issue is publicized, discussed in parliaments, or raised with Iranian officials, it sends a signal to the Iranian government that it is being held to account for its actions. The Australian government has repeatedly raised concerns with Iran in Canberra, with Tehran, and multilateral forums. As a nation, we are a co-sponsor of the annual United Nations General Assembly resolution on the human rights situation in Iran. In addition, Australia co-sponsors the Human Rights Council resolution extending the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. In December last year, there was a United Nations General Assembly resolution calling for an end to the harassment and discrimination of Baha'is in Iran. There is a strong Baha'i community in Western Australia, in particular the northern suburbs of Perth. I have been fortunate enough to meet many Baha'is living in my electorate and also in the surrounding suburbs. Through my association with the local Baha'i community over a number of years, I have observed its members to be very peaceful, tolerant, and family-orientated. The religion could hardly be described as fundamentalist or extremist in nature. Rather, it is very moderate. As I have become more familiar with individual members of the local spiritual assembly, what greatly impresses me generally about the Baha'i community is its ability of its members to integrate and assimilate into Australian society by fully and actively participating in the development and advancement of our nation through higher education, their professional careers in fields such as business, engineering, medicine, and academia.
Thank you. And the question is that the motion be agreed to. I give the call to the member for McNamara.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this important motion moved by the member for Moncrieff, and I congratulate her on raising this important matter in this place. I think that support for the brave people of Iran and opposition to religious persecution is something that unites Australia and something that unites the Australian Parliament. I have great admiration for the Baha'i people. Dr. Vahid Master is a Baha'i leader in my electorate. He is an extraordinary doctor, but he has welcomed me into his home on many occasions to celebrate the Baha'i community and the Baha'i faith. And the things that strike me on my time with the Baha'i community locally is the sense of self-respect and dignity and peacefulness, as well as a deep appreciation and love for the Australian people and the Australian community more broadly. I also have stood on the top of the Baha'i World Centre in Haifa and seen just the most breathtaking gardens that really, I think, speak volumes to the self-respect and the imagination of the Baha'i people. And yet, for the last 40 years in Iran, the birthplace of the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i do not enjoy the same freedom that they do here in Australia. Ever since the regime of the Ayatollahs came to power in 1979, the Baha'i have been persecuted for their beliefs. They've been subject to arbitrary arrest, their businesses have been closed down, their homes and places of worship have been raided. They have been denied entry to universities and they've been unable to travel. Even their cemeteries have been desecrated. This year, protests have surged across Iran, demanding greater freedom, and particularly for women. In the wake of the murder of Mahsa Amini by Iran's so-called morality police in September, the regime has responded by increasing its persecution of the Baha'i. Many Baha'i have been arrested, some were detained at their homes, while others were rounded up with other protesters in the streets. Like many of the arrested demonstrators, these Baha'i have been locked up without specific charges and have not been allowed to meet with their families. I recently spoke with the representatives of the Baha'i community locally who told me of their great concern for their family and friends in Iran, and I'm sure other members share with me those grave concerns. And they also told me that they were very grateful for the support that the Australian government, but more so the Australian people, have expressed in giving Baha'is and indeed all of the persecuted people a voice of solidarity of what's occurring in Iran. I thought I'd take a moment to just outline some of the things that have already occurred in response to the action of Iran. We have time and time again called for Iran to respect the human rights and cease the discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities. Australia's ambassador to Iran has raised our concerns in Tehran, and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has also raised concerns with the Iranian embassy in Canberra. Australia has made it clear that Iran's treatment of women and the protesters are incompatible with their membership on the UN Commission on the Status of Women. The government has been engaging with the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'i of Australia, and we will continue to advocate for the human rights of the Baha'i in Iran. Australia, as a member of the core drafting group for the UN General Assembly Third Committee resolution on the human rights situation in Iran, did play an active role in shaping the language of the resolution, including regarding the Baha'i and other minorities. So, Deputy Speaker, what we have here in Australia is a wonderful part of Australian society. We are proud of our Baha'i and we celebrate our Baha'i people here in Australia, and I acknowledge those who have come to join and listen to this debate tonight. But I also know that for them, a part of them is not complete without the Baha'i community feeling safety and freedom against persecution for what's occurring in Iran. And so we stand with the Baha'i people in Australia and of course with the Baha'i in Iran. And we raise our Australian voice to say that the persecution of the Baha'i people is unacceptable and that we hope for better days in the years to come.
Thank you. And I give the call to the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to welcome those who are here this evening representing the Baha'i community. Thank you. I'm honoured that my electorate of McKellar is the proud home of Australia's Baha'i House of Worship, one of just 13 temples around the world and the only one in the Australasian continent. It is a symbol of unity and an icon of our electorate. It stands magnificently in the hinterland of our electorate, nestled amongst the beautiful bushland. It is a place of sanctuary, it is a place of worship. And it is a place that is open and belongs to all Australians, where people of all different religions and backgrounds are welcome. This physical building is a reflection of the Baha'i faith and community, one that is committed to social cohesion and harmony and is warmly valued as part of our McKellar community and as a contributor to Australia's broader community. The Australian Baha'i community was established in 1920 and is now represented in over 350 localities and regions throughout our country. They are part of a worldwide community of Baha'i faith people, an independent world religion with more than 5 million members. On Wednesday evening, the Baha'i community will hold their annual parliamentary reception to celebrate the birth of Baha'u'llah. This event is also a celebration of the constructive cohesion and resilience demonstrated by Australians across the country and indeed many across the globe. Some of the key principles of the Baha'i faith, such as gender equality, elimination of all forms of prejudice, and human rights for all people, are values that are shared by the broader McKellar and Australian community. In neighbourhoods across McKellar and across the country, Baha'is are striving to build united and spiritually vibrant communities. However, as this motion highlights, this is not the experience of the Baha'is in Iran. Baha'i is Iran's largest non-Muslim religion, with around 300,000 Baha'is living in Iran. The Baha'is have a long history of persecution in Iran, especially since 1979, the Iranian Revolution. Official news media have inflamed this persecution by inciting hatred, which has led to many violent attacks on Baha'is and their properties, including destruction of their cemeteries. Thousands of these attacks over many decades are documented on the website Archives of Baha'i Persecution in Iran, which is administered by the Baha'i International Community, an organisation which draws attention to human rights violations committed against Iranian Baha'is. Baha'is are routinely arrested, detained and imprisoned in Iran. They are banned from holding government jobs and their shops are routinely closed or discriminated against by officials at all levels of government. Young Baha'is are prevented from attending university, and volunteer Baha'i educators are often arrested and imprisoned when they attempt to fill the education gap. Since the nationwide protest started this September, there has been an escalation of violent attacks and human rights violations on Baha'is in Iran, including interrogations, beatings, and detentions without due process. In her recent address to the UN Human Rights Council, Simin Fahadesh, representative of the Baha'i international community, articulated the deteriorating situation of human rights in Iran. She said, "The Baha'is in Iran are all too familiar with persecution, with suffering, arbitrary imprisonment, denial of higher education, hate propaganda, executions, and daily harassment for 43 years. In fact, what we see in Iran today is the extension of the persecution against the Baha'is to the generality of Iranians. A government that oppresses one group will surely be unjust to all groups in the long term." I support the member for Moncrief's motion that condemns the actions of the Iranian government's persecution of those of the Baha'i faith. Cohesion and resilience are core values of strong communities, and I wholeheartedly support not only the Baha'i community in my electorate of Makella, but the Baha'i community globally as they face the horrific persecution from the Iranian government. I just want you to know that here in Australia, we do support you, and here in the Parliament as well, and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And can I just start by welcoming all of you in the gallery of the Federation Chamber today. Thank you so much for coming and listening to us here today, and welcome to the People's House. And can I also start by thanking and congratulating the member for Moncrief for raising this critical issue with the House, with the Chamber, and with the members present here today, and with the broader community. It is such an important issue, a critical issue, not just here in Australia, but right across the world. We've seen that around the world, people have and continue to be persecuted because of their faith. We have seen communities subjugated. We've seen communities destroyed, oppressed, their belongings and property destroyed, denied access to services, jailed, or even worse. Everybody on this planet deserves the right to be who they want to be. Everybody deserves the right, if they choose, to practice their faith without persecution and to practice their faith without repercussion. And I'm a strong advocate for this, as are many of the members here tonight, many of the members in the chamber. And I will continue to be a supporter and a voice for those who are silenced because of their faith or because of their way of life. Faith is important to many because it provides people with a sense of self. It provides people with a sense of community, and it provides people with a sense of direction. Faith can unify us, and it can be the guiding light for some during the darkest of times. A few weeks ago, a gentleman named Vedad visited the Robertson electoral office. He's an elected member of the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is on the Central Coast. And I'm grateful for Vedad visiting me that day, who's given me permission to use his name, as he was kind enough to provide insight into the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i community on the Central Coast in New South Wales, across Australia, and indeed around the world. And when he was describing the Baha'i community, I'd use the same words that the member for Moncrief has used, the member for McNamara has used, many members here tonight. Peaceful, welcoming, educated, a beautiful people and a beautiful community. He spoke of the children's spiritual education classes in Gosford and the regular devotional meetings where the Baha'i community on the Central Coast would come together as one. Vedad also highlighted, Deputy Speaker, the difficulties that the Baha'i community are facing in Iran and the persecution that they are facing. As has been noted previously, the government is deeply concerned by reports that since the 2nd of August 2022, repression and discrimination against the Baha'i people in Iran have increased and they have intensified. Australia has and will continue to call on Iran to respect human rights and to cease the discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is engaging with the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is in Australia and will continue to advocate for human rights of the Baha'i in Iran. And Australia's ambassador to Iran raised our concerns to Tehran on the 14th of June 2022, and most recently the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade raised our concerns with the Iranian embassy in Canberra on the 13th of October 2022. Australia, as a member of the core drafting group for the UN General Assembly Third Committee on the resolution of human rights situation in Iran, played an active role in shaping the language of the resolution, including regarding the Baha'i and other minorities. The resolution was adopted with 79 yes votes and only 28 no votes, a better result than 2021. And again, I wish to thank the member for Moncrief for raising this important issue. And as I said earlier, Australia will call on Iran, continue to call on Iran to respect human rights and cease the discrimination of minorities. We stand with the Baha'i people and the community, both here in Australia and in Iran. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.